Welcome to another edition of the Hoff Time Report. I am your loyal and humble host, Wayne Hoffman, and here today with Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeachin. Janice McGeachin, listen carefully to the pronunciation. Don't pronounce the. Do you get tired of that?
Well, a lot of people mispronounce it. Even my own husband, when we got married, mispronounced his own name. So it's just one of those
What?
names. Yeah,
Really?
he was following the orders of the pastor, and he said, "I, Jim McGeachin, take you." And then, of course, half the church broke out laughing. And then when it was my turn to repeat the vows, and I corrected them, then the other half of the church burst out laughing.
Oh, that's
So
hilarious, amazing. So you've been
I always know when the salesmen are calling, though. So
that's a good clue, right? I love it.
yes,
So that kind of works out handily.
yes,
Okay,
yes,
excellent. Well,
yeah.
Janice McGeachin, Lieutenant Governor of the state of Idaho, welcome to the program. And of course, you're running for governor. So we're starting our series of interviewing candidates and, talking about what their candidacy is about, what issues matter most, asking questions about policy considerations. Tell us where you are in the run and what your primary focuses are.
Well, we're going to win.
Everybody says that.
But we are going to win. We
Okay.
have a path forward. I've been endorsed by President Trump, Michelle Malkin. I've gotten about 6 of the Republican Central Committees that have either endorsed my campaign or given me money, financial support. And then recently, a Conservative Action Committee here in the Treasure Valley has recently endorsed my candidacy as well. Kind of the renowned conservative group in this area. And we have the best statewide strategy campaign. We've identified 190,000 Trump households across the state. Idaho voted 65% in support of President Trump in the last election. So we're set to knock on every one of those doors or make a phone call to every one of those. And we're getting really good response and good grassroots support all across the state.
I've polled on the governor's race in the past, certainly since the COVID thing started. And Governor Little, at least in the polls that I've seen, seems to not be terribly affected by the fact that he shut down businesses and churches and told everybody to stay home. And some have not recovered from that at all. Some businesses don't exist anymore. But what are you seeing out there and in your polling and on the ground?
Well, it's not easy to run against an incumbent that's been a politician his whole life and has very high name recognition. And so when people just ask that straight ballot, and we've had polling, I've done 3 polls in our campaign so far, and every time we do a poll, we increase in our response. But when you ask that straight question, a lot of people do recognize that name and they just vote. They say that they're supportive of that name. But when you do an informed ballot asking specific questions, well, did you know that the Governor Little did this? Do you know that Governor Little did shut down businesses? Do you know that Governor Little did prevent people from going to church and that people were arrested for singing hymns outside of City Hall? We did have mask mandates. We still have vaccine mandates. When we have asked the questions that are specific and more of an informed ballot, then it just switches. I mean, people tend to have a short memory. It's my job to remind the voters of the decisions that were made under Governor Little and educate the people and make the choice be very clear in that who they're voting for to be their next governor on May 17th.
People also, I think they read the literature and they hear the talking points, and there have been upteen press releases from the governor's office talking about how he's fighting the Biden administration on vaccine mandates and so forth. What do you tell people when they say things like that?
Well, what good has that done? I mean, how much of our taxpayer dollars has been wasted on suing the Biden administration on vaccine mandates? Has that changed anything here in Idaho? No. The healthcare workers are still being forced to be vaccinated. People at Micron, there's an employee lawsuit from employees at Micron for forcing them to have a vaccine mandate. And I even see emails coming from state employees that are reaching out to my office that are also being coerced to get the vaccine. And so what good is it?
Are you talking outside the university system where we
Yes.
know?
Yep.
Really?
Yes.
So in different agencies,
Yep.
wow. And so,
Even our assisted living facilities, the Department of Health and Welfare is actually making things even more restrictive at the same time that other states in the nation are loosening their requirements. The Idaho Department of Health and Welfare is making it more strict. And so I say, what difference does it make if you wasted all this money suing the Biden administration when nothing has changed?
is the Biden administration lawsuit, do you think, is it sincere or is it a political stunt?
Political. What good does it do? They can go out there and claim that they're doing all these things, and they do that everywhere I go on the campaign trail to the Lincoln banquets. We're traveling around the state visiting every county and going to Lincoln banquets. That's part of the Republican process. And they do that. They stand before everyone and tell them that they sued the Biden administration on this vaccine mandate, but nothing has changed in Idaho, just like how we have a tent city still across from the Capitol. The governor recently announced that he was filing a lawsuit against these activists. Well, has Tent City come down? No. Tent City is still there. So
It was really strange too, because I was in the impression that the grounds were controlled by the Department of Administration, and he runs the Department of Administration.
Absolutely.
So if you were governor, what would that look like?
Well, it would look a lot different. It's part of my vision, a conservative vision for a free and prosperous Idaho.
Okay, so yeah, you brought a prop, and that's okay. Well, I'm sure the other candidates will bring props too. So we'll talk about that, because I want to know what it is that you're looking at. This is your vision. This is basically your campaign platform.
My whole campaign, Wayne, is based on three principles that I will fight to defend and protect the individual freedom and liberty, which has been violated so much in the state of Idaho the past 2 years and continues to be violated. I will work harder to defend the sovereignty of our state, which under Governor Little, he has just been giving away our sovereignty, and he's doing it through the budgeting process. When we take that money from the federal government, the feds say, well, you have to do it this way or that way, and not the Idaho way. That's what I mean when I say we're giving our sovereignty away. And then finally doing more to defend our traditional conservative values. So my campaign is based on those three principal ideas. I am a proven conservative. I have a 10-year voting record in the House of Representatives. So I have a record to back up what I say. And that's the difference, the big difference between a McGeachin administration and a Little administration. One of the big changes that I will bring to all agencies across the state of Idaho is more of an Idaho first customer service model, so that when people have a concern, whether it's an issue with their driver's license or an unemployment insurance claim or something with child protection services or something with the assisted living facility, there's a problem within the agency, they're going to get an immediate response from the agency instead of a lack of response that I see happening the whole past 4 years of my service as lieutenant governor. We field so many phone calls because people are frustrated. They can't get through to the governor's office or to the agency. So they call the lieutenant governor's office, and we try to resolve a lot of concerns that people have. But it's wrong that the people of Idaho shouldn't be able to get an immediate and a direct response from their government. And being a small business woman, I understand the importance of customer service. If I didn't provide a good service to my customer, like what I've seen on the state level, then I would be out of business.
So I want to back up a little bit, because there seems to have been a couple different versions of the Little administration, and I don't know if I wanted to see if my perceptions match yours. What was prior to COVID? it seemed as if you had a working relationship with the governor. He expressed some support for some regulatory reform, although grudgingly. And then COVID happened. And is there a difference between then and now, or do you think that Governor Little was always sort of more left of center than
He's always been more left of center. And I served in the House at the same time that he was serving in the Senate. And looking at his votes and some of the positions that he's taken, very clear difference there between my position as being a true conservative, traditional conservative, and then Brad Little being more of a moderate, on the moderate side.
you saw that back then?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. We probably don't have time to talk about all those things, but absolutely. Now, what I would like people to understand is that here in Idaho, the governor and the lieutenant governor are not on a ticket together. We both run separately in the primary. We're two separately elected constitutional officers. And so some people have criticized the actions that I've taken and accused me of not working with the governor or going behind my boss's back. But that is not the case with the decisions and my action. I have always been forthright in my opposition to the governor's decisions to shut down our state and continue to keep us in this emergency order and continue to bring all this money in. Why do we not have more tax relief for the citizens of Idaho who are suffering and struggling? Why do we not have more tax relief? It's because the governor wants to grow the budget and grow the government programs. That's a big difference between the two of us. And I have consistently spoken out against those things. And I will do so. I will continue to speak out because my allegiance is not to the governor. My allegiance is to the people of Idaho.
So, had you been governor now during this legislative session, what kind of tax relief would you have proposed?
Well, all across the board, we need overall tax relief. Idaho needs to be more competitive with the surrounding states. So the legislature is making progress lowering income tax rates, but they also need to lower sales tax rates. We need to remove the sales tax on food. There was a bill today that, well, started in the House, of course, all tax bills start there, passed the House, came to the Senate, where they talked about increasing the grocery tax rebate,
The credit.
by $20 a year. I did a quick calculate. So they're taking it from, is it 120 to 140?
Right.
Starting next year, 2023, doesn't even give any relief this year. But I did a quick calculation on a family of four that can easily spend $200 a week on food, $400 a month. That calculates that's equal to over $500 a year on sales tax. And they want us to feel good about giving them an extra $20.
And you're not even counting the inflation on top of all of that. So it potentially it's even more money.
Man, the inflation on food is so high, and it's so to your question, what more would we be doing? I would work with the legislature. That would be a priority. We need to do more to reduce property taxes here in Idaho. For the business community, we need to lower unemployment insurance taxes. That's a big burden on the small business community, and Idaho has one of the highest rates of unemployment insurance across the nation. So we need to work to lower our taxes across the board. Some people view that as a question that was asked on the Senate floor today was, well, how are you going to pay for that reduction in that tax credit that you're giving to people? And the response is, well, I guess it'll come out of the general fund. So some people take the view that if you lower taxes and the revenues shrink, there's a cost to that because the money isn't coming into fund, for the general fund to fund all this government. I just don't I don't take that view.
Which is part of the argument with regard to the grocery tax. Well, we're just going to tax people from Californians. So from California, they're coming in here and they're not paying income tax, and they come in here. Maybe they'll buy some food, and that revenue goes to the state. But the counter argument to that is, well, why don't you raise the sales tax to 20% then, and then give everybody a bigger rebate? I mean, it's crazy. It's stupid. Or tax air, for crying out loud, because Californians are going to come in here and breathe the air, and we'll just take that tax, Idahoans, and then refund the remainder back to them.
My view is it's always been of downsizing government, and the best way to downsize government is to lower the revenues that are coming in to fund the government.
So the other part of that tax break that was passed by the legislature, the 6.5% income tax to 6%, and now the grocery tax credit. But the other part of the income tax side is everyone's going to get a rebate check. And I wondered about your thoughts with regard to the fact that you get the check, you're going to get it sometime in April, maybe early May. It's going to have get the governor's name on it. The last check that came out had a message from the governor due to all the great budgeting by the state and, our, desire to return this money. Here's a check.
Same thing with the Department of Labor sending out the unemployment insurance rates that came out recently, lowering them and retroacting them back a year. Same thing. There was a letter, how wonderful the management of under the governor that we're able to do this. That's typical politics.
What is that? Is that
an incumbency thing? What
is it legal? Is it basically what is your view on that? That it
may not be illegal, but in my view, it's not ethical to be, because what's the difference of that? And I mean that's politicizing, using taxpayer dollars. For one thing, there were two additional, instead of sending the one form to all the employers that is typically sent out with the new insurance rates, there were two additional letters on top of that. So if anything, you've got to be adding to the cost of your postage to get those extra weight, mailed out to the taxpayer, the citizen.
I kind of wonder. I remember many years ago. I'll have to write about this at some point. But I remember being a reporter working for the Idaho Statesman, and I was invited into the governor's office with the editorial board for a meeting after the State of the State address. This is 2003, and we were in the heart of that recession back then. And the governor said, "I'm really working to rein in spending. I'm every nickel, every paper clip, and all that kind of stuff." And he's handing out these napkins to go with our water that had the state of Idaho seal emblazoned on it. And I said, "Well, what about these napkins?" And the governor was very, very upset with me for pointing out that they were still buying the embossed napkins. But what you're saying here is, you're taking, it may not be a huge amount of money, but it's still an expenditure, and it's done basically for the service of the administration, not for the benefit of the people who are receiving the letter, really.
Yes.
It's interesting. So is on a scale of 1 to 10, I guess, 1 being the worst governor the state has ever had, and 10 being the best governor the state has, where do you think Brad falls on that scale, in your opinion?
Well, let's see. I've served under 3 governors. I served under Kempthorne, and I served under Butch Otter, and now I've served under Brad Little. Let's just put it this way: the worst experience I've had is been under Governor Brad Little.
And what was it are you talking about an experience, or just the whole
overall? And you mentioned the first year. So, and going back to the fact that the governor and the lieutenant governor are separate constitutional offices. We didn't run as a team. I will say it out loud that I did not vote for Brad Little for governor last time.
in the primary or in the general?
In the primary.
Okay. What did you
So-
do in the general?
Well, I voted for him in
Mhm.
the general, but once we made it through the primary, then I viewed, even though he wasn't my choice for governor, I was committed to working with him.
Mhm.
And that first year, the first year of both of our service, we were getting along fine, seemingly fine. He had tasked me with the Regional Government Efficiency Task Force, and my job was to try to identify efficiencies across the state. Unfortunately, we only were able to serve for 8 months because then after that, COVID hit. So, and I wanted to dig deeper into program spending, but that wasn't his. He didn't want to go there. He wanted, it was more like scratching the surface, but that's okay. I'll help out and I'll be cooperative as best as I can. So we were seeming to get along just fine that first year, and I was working with his staff members, and we were identifying some improvements, and we did make some improvements to the process. A big step that we made that was to make an inventory of all either state-owned or state-leased properties across the state, an inventory of that, so that anytime there's a new administration that comes in, the new administration would be able to have this information readily available, what buildings the state owned or what leases were out there and how much were they paying, per square foot for leases. We found one agency that was all the way up at the top of the Hoff building.
Really?
Floor, that they were paying way high square footage lease rates.
Oh, is that the STEM Action Center?
Yes.
They're still there.
They're still there.
Yeah.
But sometimes the agencies are locked into these leases, so we have to factor that in. But when their leases are, we need to know that information of when the lease is coming due so that we can quickly make adjustments to
Right.
find something that's more cost effective and save money for the taxpayer.
So the relationship went off the rails. I get the reasons why that occurred, but it wasn't when COVID started. He put you on his coronavirus committee, the one that was, I don't know, not quite quasi legislative. It had legislators on it, but they're the ones making a decision on, what was it, 1.6 billion?
I think it was, I thought it was more like 8 billion, that CARES Act funding.
I don't remember. I don't remember the figure, but anyway, you were responsible for this huge amount of money, and
One member out of a number, 16 others.
so your relationship was good enough at that point he put you on that committee.
I think the governor was making an effort to try to develop a better relationship between the two of us because.
Hang on a second. Oh yeah, let's picture. Okay, there you go. Somewhere we lost you. So go ahead, start again.
Yeah, I think the governor was attempting to make an effort to have better communication and a working relationship, which got off to a very bad start from the beginning of the coronavirus when it started happening in the state. I was intercepting emails that were going back and forth between legislative leadership and the governor, and my office was being completely left out of the line of communication. And then when the governor decided to issue his lockdown order, a statewide lockdown, I was on the phone with him 2 days before he made that decision, and he made no mention of what was
he didn't
about to
casually,
come down.
really?
No, in fact, he was joking. He was kind of joking about how the Boise mayor had just shut down restaurants and places in downtown Boise, and he was jokingly kind of scoffing, well, all the people that are going to that's going to happen is they're just going to go across the street to Garden City. And he said that to me on the phone and made no mention about what it was. That was on a Tuesday, and then it was on Thursday that he shut the whole state down and made no mention.
Was that his view, that maybe he'd be somehow serving the entire state by not having the competition of cities who shut things down and then they go to other cities? Is that?
I just when the governor and I finally did get back together to have a conversation, because we did go several weeks without any communication. And I reached out to the governor can we meet to reestablish some communication? And I said to the governor in that meeting, I said, Governor, you made no mention of the decision to me 2 days before. I said, what was it that something must have intimidated you to go to making that draconian action 2 days later? So we had met and we were trying to reestablish a relationship and communication. It was shortly after that that he asked me to serve on that CARES CFAC. It was Coronavirus Financial Advisory Committee.
So you didn't really answer my question, though. I don't think, on a scale of 1 to 10,
Oh,
where do you put him?
I'm going to say, I'm just the way I'll answer that question. I've only served under 3 governors, and so I would put him on a scale of 10 as being the worst one that I've served with.
So is your issue with Governor Little relegated to his philosophies, or is it how he manages
No,
the state?
the
or is
management
it's
of the
management?
state, and the just leaving. And it wasn't just the lieutenant governor that he left out of the, sitting around the table to make these decisions. It was the other constitutional officers. It was legislative leadership. It was just from day one, it was kind of a top-down approach where he appointed the special advisory committee to direct, tell him what to do during COVID. And I told the governor, just to give you an example, these advisory committees that were advising him on decisions, I kept asking over and over. So if you don't want to put me on that, or you don't want to let me sit in on the meetings, just give me a call-in number so that I can listen to the conversation that was being had. And he refused to do that. He would not even give the lieutenant governor a call-in number just so that I could listen.
Why
And I
is
said,
that?
Governor, you don't have to listen to anything that the lieutenant governor has to say. You can say, you're here to listen, but I don't want to hear what you have to say. But you can listen. But because I think it's important for the second in command to be aware of what's going on, especially with these big, big decisions that
So
affected people's lives.
why did he do that?
You'd have to ask him.
You have
He
no
would
idea
not
the
give.
reason why?
They just refused to give that ability for me to. And my husband Jimmy will testify. He was there, and they just refused to do it.
So let's say that it's March 2020 and you're the governor. You had been governor, and the Dr. Fauci and company at CDC were freaking out. Oh, the pandemic is here. You need to do something. What would you have done?
Well, it's always hard to, be in the position where 2 years down the road, you say, well, I would have done this or I would have done that. What I would have done is it would have been more of a collaborative approach to problem solving, because that's my style. That's my management style. In my businesses, that's what we do. When we have challenges, we bring our top management to the table and we listen to them, because they're the ones that deal with our customers the most and can bring good ideas. And sometimes they bring ideas that we don't want to hear, but it's still important that we hear different perspective, different views. So I would have done that differently. I would have brought more people to the table and had it been more of a collaborative approach. But I can unequivocally say that I would never have shut down legitimate businesses, forced them to close their doors, or ordered people to stay at home and prevented people from gathering, made it illegal to gather. You can make a recommendation and you can advise people, but we have to give information to people and let people and trust people to make the right decisions for themselves.
Is there a governor that you followed that you think you would have modeled if had you been in the position?
Well, of course, Christy Noem, because South Dakota, she was the one that was the most strong, I believe, during that time, and never did
never
give in
yeah.
to the Rachel Maddow's. Is it Maddow or Maddox? Rachel
Rachel
Maddox.
Maddow, yeah.
Maddow
On
would never have
MSNBC.
caved to that or
It was
caved to
because,
the
and actually, you make a very good point, because Rachel Maddow criticized the governor, and then it was what, a couple of days later that he went and did the executive order. So fascinating turn of events.
Yeah.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit, the media have been obsessed with your office budget, which I find fascinating because they don't talk about the $4 billion Medicaid budget that spends in a day as much as as much as your office budget happens to. Well, no, that takes back maybe about a week. In about a week, they've spent the amount of money that your office spends in a year. So what's that all about? And is there a legitimate criticism that, well, she can't manage a $145,000 budget, so how can she manage this multi-billion-dollar business that is the state of Idaho?
That is completely not a legitimate argument. I mean, I manage multi-million-dollar companies, and I've helped to manage the Medicaid budget with the state of Idaho. So I have the experience. That's my background. The criticism it stems last year, the legislature, and it was specifically the budget committee, they made a decision to cut my budget back without any explanation. And when literally when they found out that a certain person who was providing consulting services for the lieutenant governor's office, who also happened to do some business with your organization. That's what that was all about.
That was all
what
it
it
was.
was all
So
about. Because they took the amount that was being paid for these consulting fees, about $800 a month, and which added up, $9,600 a year, about $10,000. That's how much they tried to cut my budget last year. I was successful in getting it all fully restored, but that's what that was all about.
So there might be somebody who watches that and says, "Oh my gosh, the conservative Republican legislature has tried to do something to Lieutenant Governor McGeachin's budget. So clearly, it's an issue with the Lieutenant Governor because these guys are wonderful and pure." It's a political thing, isn't it?
It was absolutely political, and not one member of the budget committee could give me an explanation or a reason of why they justified trying to pull that money out of my budget, $10,000 out of a $184,000 budget. Not one of them could ever explain why it was being cut. And I was asked to go back to before the committee a second time so that they could ask me more questions. And one of the things they said, well, you've got two FTPs that are appropriated or three, excuse me.
Full-time person.
Yeah, full-time people. Myself, my chief of staff, and then there was one other. And they said, well, you never used that third person fully. And I said, well, I haven't because I, don't need it when the legislature is out of session. And it's because it's kind of quiet around the Capitol when the legislature goes home. But when the legislature is still in business, I do need that extra help. And so they were trying to just claim that I had never utilized the full-time position, like having a third full-time position in my office, but I didn't need it. So I wasn't utilizing it as a full-time position, more as a part-time temporary position.
And then you had another budget hassle, I guess, this legislative session with regard to the legal fees on the Idaho Press Club lawsuit. So now you've got people that are criticizing you over that. What was the media after when they were going? I mean, really, what were they looking for?
They wanted the names and the addresses of Idahoans who had submitted comments to my office on the issue of what was happening in our schools and the universities. So I because I had formed a task force to examine this. It was a heavy discussion last year. Budgets were cut. And I'm a person that's like, okay, let's try to get to the bottom of this. What is this? What is critical race theory? To what extent, if any, is it happening in our classrooms? And so I formed this task force. It was made completely of citizens and there were no taxpayer dollars used. I had some great members of the citizens of the state of Idaho came on their own expense, committed to studying this. And I put out a press release asking citizens of Idaho if they had had any experience with any of this to please let me know. So I was receiving literally thousands of comments. Now, a lot of it was hate mail, a lot of people criticizing our effort, but there were some legitimate concerns that were expressed, and they named students, our kids, they named teachers and school districts, professors, they named city council members. So it was all about shielding the name of the individual that submitted the comment and shielding the address of that person. And so that's what it was all about. I was all about protecting the identity of the person, the whistleblower. And I made it clear from the very beginning with all three of the reporters that they can have the comments, but I'm going to redact the name and the address. And this was all from the advice of the Attorney General's office. And we lost that case in the court. And the court ordered that my office pay the fees, the legal fees.
You didn't appeal that lawsuit.
No, because I don't have the funds. When you appeal a case, I mean, it can be upwards of $250,000, and my budget is $184,000. I didn't have the funds for that.
I noticed that there are other public officials in Idaho with whom the media are having issues with public records. One is the mayor of Boise, for example. There have been some issues with Ada County. They haven't sued, the media have not sued the city. They've not sued anybody else for records. Why did they pick you?
Well, the media's been picking on me since day one, even before while I was campaigning. They've been picking on me. I live rent free in their heads.
I know that feeling.
I mean, really, the question, why so much focus and attention on this case and not focus and attention on, like, how much did the governor spend to sue the Biden administration on the vaccine mandate?
Did you, I mean, so you felt that was a political attack as well, that the media was using the lawsuit as a vehicle to write negative stories about you?
Absolutely.
And that was
Yeah.
what they ended up doing. Did they actually, I haven't seen, did any of the reporters write stories about what they found after they got the records from the lawsuit?
Well, it was all just about how it was all the negative remarks that came
But they had
across.
that already. So, I mean, I'm wondering,
Yeah, they did.
What did they get that was special and different that they did
it-
all this reporting on? Because I never saw it.
Good point. I mean, why even go forward with the lawsuit?
They
Because
got the records.
the records had been released to another national
Yeah.
or entity with names redacted, and they
were fine
and this organization was willing to pay the fee, because again, I have one staff member, and we had to go through, it's a stack of emails about that high, and he had to go through and redact, because I don't have a redacting program. The Attorney General's office attempted to redact. They redacted a lot of it. They were actually redacting the full comments, which this was advice from the Attorney General, and they had a redacting tool in their office, but I didn't have that. So my chief of staff had to go through and physically block out the name and address. And to do that, the law provides that we can assess a fee to do that based on the time that it takes. And it was about a $500 fee, which this other organization willingly paid the fee. So we shipped off those documents to them. They were out there, they were readily available, but the press club just continued with their lawsuit. So I've been criticized by Idaho media for having it be an expense to the taxpayer. My pushback is, it's the press club that ended up costing the taxpayer because they refused to back down on their lawsuit. If they would have been willing to pay the fee, they could have had the documents without the names of the individual.
That
It's in my
lawsuit,
office today. Anybody can come look at it.
that lawsuit also distracted from the entire mission of the CRT task force. Did it
I
end
believe
up
that's part of it too.
accomplishing? Is that what they were trying to do? And did you accomplish what you set out to do?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We learned a lot in our work. We learned a lot about what's happening at the universities. We learned a lot about what's happening in the K through 12 by scrutinizing some of the regulations that are written into code. We found references to these national organizations, and probably most people don't understand what this means, but incorporated by reference into the rule, meaning that if you reference a national organization into your rule, that becomes part of your rule. And when they change their standards, then it automatically changes the Idaho standard. And we discovered that. So we learned a lot. And then our final meeting, we came up with a number of recommendations. And one of those was to support a true school choice option in Idaho.
Why why do you think that based on well, let me back up. Is CRT then still in our schools and in our higher education system, or as the universities and the K-12 system say, it's not happening?
It is certainly in the university system, and we know that. But what we know about our K through 12 schools that there are results of the critical race theory, which comes through in other areas like diversity, equity, inclusion, social emotional learning. Those are all just different forms of critical race theory because that terminology became so explosive and controversial. Then they just started changing the definition of what they call this, but it's all this based on the same concept that we're going to go in and we're going to teach people at a very young age that because of a certain circumstance, because of the color of your skin, or because of a position in your community or within your family, that you're disadvantaged over somebody else. And so therefore, we're going to try to equalize everybody to be the same. And that's not what our system is based on, the system of America.
Were you expecting that the legislature was going to be more receptive to your task force findings?
I was certainly hopeful. In fact, we reached out to members of both the House and the Senate Education Committee. It just got to be such a politically charged issue that unfortunately the members of the legislature did not really engage on this as much as they should have.
So if we look at that and we ask the question, okay, is that a you problem or is that a legislature problem? Would another governor, another lieutenant governor had been able to move that policy through the legislature, or is there a problem with the state legislature that's preventing them from taking a look at those issues?
That's a good question. It's because it's so baked in with rules and the State Board of Education and the Idaho Education Association. I think what it has done is it's been very revealing the level of influence that these associations have on the legislative body. And it's been eye-opening. That's why I believe we've seen a number of new seats on local school boards, because parents are what they're seeing, they're not happy, and they want to see some change, and it's kind of happening organically rather than through the policy body.
Which is, I mean, that's good to see those parents engaged, but my gosh, the
Mhm.
legislature seems to not be terribly invested in that issue.
But I mean, like, for example, the education savings account, the true school choice bill that was presented. Why, in such a ruby red state, Can we not have a true education choice bill? It didn't even make it out of the House Education Committee, lost by one vote.
The critics, the defenders of that will say, of the failure to pass the ESA will say, well, we've got this Empower Parents grant program that the governor created in the midst of the coronavirus, using some COVID dollars, and now it's back again with, I think, a $50 million appropriation to give grants to. That solves the problem, they say.
But at least from what I know about those grants, is that it is not allowed to be used for tuition and
That's
education.
correct.
So, and that's, I mean, you have these pods, educational pods that are popping up in places even like California. And that's what the whole idea behind the ESA is, if the money could follow the student for the educational purpose, that you could have parents form these educational pods and maybe have 10 or 12 students in the classroom, and you could pay a teacher I think it was $6,000 was going to follow the student. If there were 10 students in a pod, you could pay the teacher $60,000. And in my view, it's a win-win, because the teacher would be being paid more, and the teacher would only have 10 students
Well, why the
in the
reluctance to
classroom.
do that then?
Um, I'm baffled. I am really truly baffled when we are a so-called ruby red state. I think the people of Idaho are more ruby red, but we're finding out that some of the people in those positions are certainly more blue than ruby red.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about your agenda. You brought your prop here. I, by the way, invited Governor Little to be on the program. There are a couple other Ed Humphreys and Steve Bradshaw who are running. They can bring their prop in too, and we can talk about their agendas as well. I'd love to do that, because it's important to understand not just the rhetoric, but what each candidate is about. So let's talk about this.
Sure. 10 bullet points, which provides a conservative vision for a free and prosperous Idaho. And just have to understand, my philosophy of government is that it should be small and it should be limited. Get the government the heavy hand of government off the individual, and allow the individual to thrive absent this government. And I see it all the time, where in the business community, we're so bogged down by so many regulations and reporting requirements. Probably a majority of a big amount of our time is spent trying to just comply with government regulations on the state and the federal level. And we just, and fees that we pay. I mean, we have a restaurant, and we pay a licensing fee to the city of Idaho Falls. We pay a fee to the Bonneville County. We pay a fee to the state of Idaho. Why do we have to pay 3 fees for the same license? It's just continues to take money away from the bottom line of the company, which allows the company to then go out and hire more people, buy more inventory, buy more pieces of equipment. Because in the private sector, we have to continually reinvest in our employees and our equipment, our businesses, in order to be successful.
How many government agencies do your businesses deal with? If you counted them all
Tax,
up,
Department of Labor, and then
you got health inspectors, public
yeah,
health
public health,
district.
and
You've got the state police because you
state
have a liquor
police.
license. You got planning and zoning, I guess, if you decided to put tables out on the sidewalk or whatever, and you've done that. It's got to be a lot.
It is a lot, and it's just, it cobbles our efforts up as entrepreneurs, as business owners, which we're trying to provide opportunities for our employees, and it sidelines our attention to what is really effective and what matters to get good paying jobs out there.
So you list on, I'm sure this isn't is it priority order, or is it just you're listing it in terms of things that you want to
It's not
address?
priority level, but I will say that as I've traveled around, this is a product of my effort to travel across the state of Idaho and listen to the people of Idaho. And so, probably number one on the minds of people is that they want to end medical tyranny. They want freedom to be able to make their own choices for their health
And by
decisions.
the way, we've seen that play out not just with COVID, but just in the last several days with Diego Rodriguez and
Oh,
the
yes.
abduction of his grandchild.
Yep.
And Diego
Well,
was on here yesterday.
that's my
Rein in
rein in the
abusive
abusive
overreach.
overreach by CPS,
When you
which
say that,
violates constitutional and
when
parental
you say that,
rights.
how do you envision that working?
I can see my vision is that, again, getting the government out of that role and maybe working with our faith community to have a more loving and in, inclusive and accepting environment for our kids.
And you're using the word inclusive, not in the diversity, equity, and
Inclusive,
inclusion
no,
meaning.
inclusive meaning that
I would presume anyway.
meaning that, what I mean, in my view, sending a child to a medical facility is not the best ideal. More inclusive would be to have that child be with a family member or a friend, a family friend. So we're looking at more options to be considered
And
than just
and
taking them
state
out
law
of the.
says that already, that there's a pecking order where where a child's supposed to be placed, and family and friends of the family are supposed to be high on that list. And do we know why they skipped ahead the Department of Health and Welfare
Well,
to the let's go ahead and
I don't know all the facts in that case, but I've also been over the past weekend with this case with baby Cyrus. I was notified about a woman in Idaho who was pregnant and she wanted to give up her baby for adoption to a family member in a different state. And they had legal documents for the legal adoption. The woman who lived in Idaho who was pregnant, she somehow got in trouble with the law. She was arrested. I don't know what I've requested. I always look at both sides. I can do that as a lieutenant governor, look at the case. But she got adjudicated into the legal system because of something, breaking the law, being arrested. She went into the hospital to have her baby, and when she had the baby, CPS immediately took the baby away from her, and the state of Idaho is not honoring and respecting these documents that were already legal. And I do have copies of these legal documents, legal adoption papers with this other state. So um, I don't know why this is happening in our state. It might be, it was suggested that maybe some of the federal money that we're getting now lays out some more restrictive requirements. I don't know if that's the case, but I'm going to be sure to find out if that's part of it.
The Department of Health and Welfare was something that you oversaw, you had oversight over as the head of the Health and Welfare Committee when you were in the legislature. Now fast forward a little bit, and you've seen the department operating up close, both in that capacity and as lieutenant governor. What would you do? Would you dismantle the department?
It's
Would you?
gotten worse. There's gotten to be more bureaucracy during COVID. So this is what happens in our assisted living facilities, that care for the elderly. During COVID, they were all shut down. If there's a report of that they violated a rule, and some of the rules that these facilities have to abide by, and they're coming from CMS, they're very restrictive. They're even more restrictive than the food safety regulations, and I know how restrictive those are. But if there's one allegation of a violation of any one of those rules, then the Medicaid division must go out and do an inspection on the facility and clear the air, make sure they're okay to continue operating. Well, during COVID, because the workers, the inspectors, the surveyors didn't want to go out into the community because they were working from home, these facilities, they never were able to get these injunctions resolved. So in some of our biggest care providers in Idaho went from 90% occupancy rate down to 50% occupancy rate, nearly put them out of business simply because the workers didn't want to go out into the community and do their job. So I would have been like President Reagan, where he said, you get out and you do your job, or I'll find someone else that will come in. And it's just, so the bureaucracy has just gotten more, it's gotten bigger and more restrictive since I was serving in the House 6 years ago.
Medicaid is now the largest program in all of state government. It's grown from about $4 billion to, oh wait, did I get that right? Wait, 4 billion to 8 billion, or is it 2 billion to 4 billion? I think it was
numbers
two,
are staggering.
it was
It's-
2 billion to 4 billion. Sorry, there's just so many numbers. But it has doubled
Mhm.
since you left the legislature.
Mhm.
Part of it is Medicaid expansion, but not all of it. Just as a thought experiment, would you get rid of Medicaid expansion if you could? I mean, would you propose getting rid of Medicaid expansion?
Well, that's a big difference between Brad Little and I when he was campaigning for governor, I was campaigning for lieutenant governor. I took a position in opposition to the expansion of Medicaid. And the reason why I did that is because, again, I am concerned about the explosive growth of our national deficit. I've seen that Medicaid has not been the most responsive to the citizen, and I think other private sector free market solutions would do a better job of serving the individual. I had a woman that was on Medicaid and she had an insulin pump, and it quit. It just kept not working right. And Medicaid wouldn't do anything about it. Their excuse was it's just out of warranty and we're not going to be able to do anything about it. But if she, if one thing goes wrong, to send her insulin, levels sky high, to send her into the hospital, that could turn into $1 million bill. So it's so much more, makes so much more sense to just replace the pump and do that than to ignore the problem and have people get sick and have to be sent to the hospital. So I know that we can do a better job of taking care of the needs of Idahoans and not be so strapped to what the federal government tells us that we have to do. And part of the money they accepted into the budget last year, they took a higher reimbursement rate from the federal government. And a condition of that was that the state of Idaho, even if we found people in our Medicaid program that were not eligible, did not meet the eligibility requirements of Medicaid, we couldn't do anything about it. We couldn't remove them from Medicaid.
They have to move out
It
of
was
state, or they die, or ask to be taken off the program. That's the only way you can get them off the system now.
Well, the federal government just wouldn't. So now we have people that are perhaps on the program that we can't take off the program because the federal government says we can't. The problem with that is that doesn't serve those who need it the most. I mean, you'd have millionaires, people that have $1 million worth of assets that are able to be on our Medicaid program. And then we have these low income people that are suffering, can't get an insulin pump replaced.
So your position on the Medicaid expansion was before the voters voted for it. If you were the governor, if you were elected governor in 2023, would proposing a repeal of Medicaid expansion still be on your?
Well, that's one of my bullet points, that we would provide affordable free market alternatives to Obamacare.
Does that extend to Medicaid itself? Would you try to get the state off of or out of the Medicaid program? There's no law that says we have to be in Medicaid. We just kind of do it.
Well, we could, but we have to position our state better in order to do that, because right now we are so dependent on the federal government. To just cut that funding out, we would not be able to provide some of the services that people are relying on right now. But so it's kind of two-pronged approach. We have to wean ourselves from the federal government. We do that by making better use of our renewable resources. We have a great reserve of rare earth minerals that we can become truly energy independent in Idaho. We have the resources, we have the skill and the talent, but we just can't do it because of the federal government.
So I don't know if we want to go through every single bullet point here. People can read about it on your website, but do want to hit some of the highlights, which uh, perhaps, I mean, maybe I'm a policy wonk, so I read
So
that
am I.
stuff and I'm like, man, I
Yeah,
want
so
to
am
talk
I.
about all those things, but we'll be here for hours on end.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell me what you want to hit next, and we'll kind of talk about it.
Well, we've talked a bit about Idaho's economy and doing more to support small business, and there's a lot more that we can do. I would work towards repealing all those special interest tax incentives, which brought Facebook into Idaho. Facebook, which is they gobbled up some of our agricultural land. What does that do to support our small family farms?
That was because of a crony tax policy that was
Exactly.
passed by the
Yeah.
legislature,
Yeah.
and you see that all the time in spades. You see it
It
with the
happened
way urban,
again
yeah,
just last week with
it,
Micron, the
yep,
semiconductor bill.
yep.
And why is this happening? Why are they voting to give favorable position to outside companies? We already have a concern with growth. Why are they wanting to bring more of these corporations into our state, gobbling up our farmland, using more water than they're replacing, and not doing more to support our small business community? For all those people that had to pay, the governor issued citations to $2,500 citations to because they opened up out of necessity. We should be paying that money back to those small business owners.
Some states have done that, I understand. Did Florida
That's
pass
what
it?
I'll do as your next governor.
So
No,
okay,
it's
so
tough on there.
so you'd have on here end pension spiking, which I thought we'd gotten rid of, but is there more of that taking place than perhaps?
Specifically there, and this is where my pledge is that I will, when I become the governor, I will find a way to not. So the way it works is they take the full number of years of service, and they pay you out of your last highest wage. So as a lawmaker, I earned 15, 16,000.
Right.
10 years, 4 years as lieutenant governor, 43,000, and then 4 years or 8 as governor at 175,000. My whole service of on my pension for the would be a 20, 20 up to maybe 22 years if I served 2 terms as a governor, would be based on the $175,000. And I think that's not right.
But my understanding was that the issues resolved going forward, that supposedly legislators are not getting that benefit. Anyone elected after, when was it, 2018, I think, they're not going to be eligible for that. But there you still have the issue of all these people who are in that system who still would. If Scott Bedke were to become lieutenant governor and then eventually become governor, he would benefit from that system.
Yeah, and from what I understand is that if you're elected official, but then you go on to become appointed to be a director, that's where I think it's. I
You
don't
still have
think
that. You
it's.
still have that problem.
Yeah, that's more what I'm
Okay.
talking about that
The
too.
legislature aspect has been addressed, but not the other. You could be a
Mhm.
part-time city councilman and benefit from that, I suppose. I'm sure that happens.
But that's why a lot of people that serve in the legislative body for whether it's 5 years, 10 or 20, they then want to go on and become agency directors because they get paid pretty high salaries, and their pension is based on that higher salary. There was a bill today that went through, they went through and they gave a 5% cost of, increase the annual wage of the commissioners, the agency commissioners, like the tax commissioner. And we got these, I couldn't help but think, I'm not naming any names, but I couldn't help but think that a lawmaker that's been there for a long time, his wife was a legislator for a while, and now she's a commissioner. She's earning over $125,000. I
Oh,
mean,
that's a good
it's
point.
just this, this
That's a good
system
point.
that just builds favoritism for certain, the elite few, and doesn't necessarily work for the ordinary everyday Idahoan.
Talk to me a little bit about some of the state sovereignty part. I mean, I'm reading this and thinking, okay, we have now, I think it's north of 40% of the state budget comes from federal money, and I always hear this argument, oh, we're gonna reduce our reliance on federal dollars, but then they'll say, oh, but we're state taxpayers and we pay into the federal government, and if we have a grant or some opportunity, we should take that money because it'll get used in California or whatever. How
I
do
heard
you
that today on the floor
okay,
of the
did you?
Senate.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I've heard people say that
I
position.
I challenge any lawmaker that has that view. Then you tell me what you are going to do to reduce the national deficit and the burden on that you, by your vote, is placing on every man, woman, and child in this country. Quit using that excuse that if we don't take it, it's going to go to some other state. Quit using that excuse. Every one of our federal delegation voted against that money, and now I'm talking specifically about ARPA funding, but
And now we're
it's
spending it in spades.
yeah,
The
it's shocking
the
to me.
question that I have, though, extends even beyond ARPA. It's all these different federal programs, and I read the Constitution, and I don't see anything in the Constitution about federal grants to work on environmental issues or education issues or healthcare issues. So now you're the governor, and the state is heavily, we just talked about Medicaid, where the state is heavily dependent on all these federal grants. You can't run a single state government agency, maybe the lieutenant governor's office is the exception. You can't run any of the other state agencies, not a one of them, I think, without some federal money because of all the program. How do you end that?
Well, you just say no. We just say we're not going to take that. I mean, the one bill in particular that I was talking about that passed the Senate today was to take $50 million of ARPA funds and create affordable
Workforce
housing.
housing,
Is
yep.
that the role of government?
Never seen anything in
S-
there like that.
That's not the role of
It's not in
government.
our it's not only not in our constitutions, either state or federal, but it definitely isn't the proper role of
It's
government.
not the proper role of
But
government.
that passed overwhelmingly.
Oh yeah.
Of course
hmm
it did. It had a little bit of debate
hmm
in the House, and it
I'm like, please, can there please be some debate? Let's have some good debate on these issues, but they just fly through. And it's just so easy for them to take this money. And the whole time I'm thinking, okay, you're just going to create a whole new level of bureaucracy. And also you're not giving there was some good comments made by one of the senators that said, it's written into the statute that they're giving a guideline of what they should do, but you're pretty much giving the free leeway to the agency. It's going to be
they're
done through
making up as they
let
go.
them
Yep.
create these things the way they see fit, and that is not the way to do things. And these special interest tax incentives, they go before the director of commerce, and that's where a lot of cronyism and and one of the names that was read across the Senate floor of as an example of, tell me one of the names of these developers who might be able to qualify for these funds. And Ball Ventures was one of them. Last I saw, Ball Ventures was doing quite well, thank you. Didn't need the taxpayer to be subsidizing their cost of buildings. And I've just seen too many examples across the state that, again, it's not for the true benefit of the individual, that they be locked into these units that they can't. If it was a true if if it's true free market, you can go in and buy a condo for $126,000, and 5 years down the road, when the market's booming, you could sell it for 500,000, and that would enable that young family to then go buy up and buy a bigger house. But in these projects, they're limited. They can only sell it's only allowed to increase in value a certain amount every year, and they're limited by the potential gain that they could have on those units.
So back to the federal money part. So it's 2023. Maybe you've been elected governor. How much federal money would be in your budget?
The first thing we're going to do is just stop taking it. Any more new money, we're just going to stop taking it. So you can go through the whole budget this year and pull out all that was not really necessary. They just decided to spend it and create new programs. That's the first thing to do. And the governor sets the tone. That's the first thing the governor does, is submit agency budgets in August, September. The governor sets the tone by those budgets that he recommends.
In a perfect world,
He or she.
he or she, in a perfect world, and that this is where you say we don't know if we've had a female governor before because we haven't asked the identity, we haven't asked the other governors to identify whether they're male or female. Apparently, Isn't that
The governor
crazy?
may be a bicycle and not a
It's
motorcycle.
just crazy. It's just this is the world we live in today. But
Mhm.
anyway, I digress. By the end of your first term, were you to become governor, how much federal money ideally do you think you could extract? How much money would be left or what percentage of the state budget would be federal dollars?
My goal would be to go from 45 back down to 36, where we were when I first started. When I campaigned for lieutenant governor, that's where we were at. So that would be my goal. And I think we can do that by scrutinizing those budgets. Second thing on there under state sovereignty, where we're going to eliminate rules and programs that conflict with our Constitution. Those are going to be the easiest and the first
What
things to go.
what percentage of the state government fits that bill?
I would easily say 15%,
Hmm.
15, 20%.
Do you have examples?
As an example, when I was on this committee looking for regional efficiencies, we found within the office of the governor, it was called an office of volunteerism. Why do we have an office on
I'm not even sure
volunteerism?
I've heard of that. Oh, was that thing that Lori Otter set up a number of years
I'm
ago?
not sure exactly who set it up or where it came from, but we found this. It was an interesting exercise that the committee members did. Just walk into these agencies, don't tell them who you are, just walk in and start asking questions. And the one person walked in and discovered that, these posters on the wall, how to be a good volunteer. And I drove by, there's a place on State
How to
Street
be a
that, I
good
mean,
volunteer.
all you have to do is go look at the budget that funds that, and you say, okay, well, whether it's 250,000 or if it's 2 million, you can say, well, that's an amount that we can throw into this pot that we're going to start
Okay.
healing back.
Okay.
And the thing that's going to be good about that is you're going to turn those things back to the private sector, going to create opportunities for the private sector to perform that service. And I'm not saying that you give taxpayer dollars to do that, but what I'm saying, it just provides an opportunity that if a business person wanted to provide that service, they could build a business model around that.
Well, but you don't even have that opportunity because so many different enterprises of the state of Idaho are run by the state. I mean, I hate public television. I hate it so much. People say, well, no one else is providing the content that they're doing on public television, the state produced content. Well, of course they aren't, because you've already driven them out. There's no ROI to do that. You're the competition. You're run by the state of Idaho. Why would you produce that content?
Why is the state of Idaho in the business of liquor, having these liquor stores all over the state? And that's another thing that it's been brought to my attention, that the liquor division now wants to do away with these larger bottles, which for the business person, you can have more profitability if you can buy the larger bottle, because it's just your
Right.
costs are lower, and they're going to do away with those because for them, they don't want to it cuts too much into their bottom line, and they're too heavy for their employees.
Had not heard that issue before. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's all about too much about what's good for the agency and the division, and not what's good for the consumer.
So the state shouldn't be in the liquor business, is what you've just said. That's an interesting position. Support that one. But should the state be in the lottery business?
I don't gamble. I mean, I'll go to Las Vegas and take $20 and play video poker, and then that's it.
That's me
So
too.
I don't go buy these cards. So I would say no. I don't think so. I don't think the state should be in that business.
Should the state be in the public television business?
No.
Should the state be in the unemployment insurance business?
I think we could certainly, the private sector could do a better job.
And there are
managing
private sector unemployment
Mhm.
insurance businesses. They compete with the state of Idaho.
Well, just as an example, during COVID shutdown, the lockdowns, when I was trying to help thousands of Idahoans, and I was trying to help them with their application, and there was about 7 or 8 reasons that you would check the box why you're applying for unemployment. And even being an established business owner, there were 2 or 3 of those boxes that I was not sure exactly how they should be filling out the box. And if you filled it out wrong, then that's why there was such a lag, that people got thrown back into the system, and they were in there for another, 4 to 6 weeks. A simple thing to do is just have one box that you checked saying you were laid off due to COVID. It's that simple.
Yeah.
But the
And-
government agency doesn't think in that way of how, because they don't have to do those kind of things.
And if you didn't have that, you can go to your church, or you can go to a nonprofit organization and say, I've been laid off, and they have a fund that's set up for you that helps people who have been laid off or can't find work or whatever. And you can't, those models compete against the government.
Well, I mean, as business owners, we pay that tax anyway. So why don't we have the choice of choosing which insurance company we want to deal with?
Okay, so let's talk about education, because I love education, and I don't want to let this interview end without it. It's on your bullet point list. We already talked about school choice. You talk about fixing the public school curriculum. How good is it? How bad is it? Where do we land in terms of the quality of the curriculum in Idaho?
I think that's where we have a lot of opportunity to make improvements through the administrative rules in the Department of Education. And I had mentioned earlier where we make reference to these national organizations that just brings a bunch of just nonsense in, when we should be just going back to the basics of let our teachers teach, let them do what they like to do. The basics of the ABCs, the 1, 2, 3s, get rid of Common Core, which is just so complex, and let teachers teach, go back to some of the basics about American civics and Idaho history. And I'm also a big proponent of skills-based training. We don't have shops in our schools that much anymore. Sadly, we have daycares. The shops in the schools have been replaced by daycare facilities. It's very sad. But those are some of the things that people are able to learn, real skills. And when they get out of high school, whether they want to go on to college or not, they can have some good paying jobs available to them.
The current administration and the previous governor focused heavily on the quote unquote go on rate.
Oh, we had an issue with that too. And for more than 10 years, the state of Idaho they have failed to meet their goals on their goal is to have I think it's 60%.
Yeah, 60 or 65. I don't remember the figure. It was
For
stupid.
more than 10 years.
And the question that I kept asking the State Board of Education is, so how, with the attrition of students in the college system, how many would you have to actually put into college in order to get the go on rate to be what you need it to be? with the having graduated, because the goal wasn't just to go on, it was to graduate with a degree or certificate of some kind. So, I mean, it's got to be north of, because you have these students come in and they don't finish their degree. At Boise State, it was, I don't know what the figure is now, but it was somewhere in the 30% range when they first started talking about that. We're going to increase the go on rate, but only 30% of students are getting degrees. This over at University of Idaho is like 50% after 6 years. So how many students, all of them, it would seem like, would have to enroll in college in order to get the go-on rate to be 65%, or to get the degree or certificate threshold met?
It's the way they measure that. That's what's wrong. So I did have the professional organization come to my office and talk to me about there's so many other fields of interest and training that are less, they're 1 year or less. And the state of Idaho doesn't count those at all. So they
Why is
keep,
that?
well, we brought that up to the attention of the State Board of Education. And we said, if you counted these programs and they're really successful, people graduate from these programs and they can get immediate jobs, sometimes up into the six-figure incomes, and said, if you would count these certificates, then look what it would do to your go on rate. And they all agreed and they said, yeah, it's a good idea. It would help that number, but we just don't know how to measure that yet. And I said, oh, is that the problem? You don't know how to measure that? So I went back to the association. I said, can you do this? Can you figure out a way that you measure the success of your program? And then within a month, they had that done and they had it on their website. So, we did, again, we too much bureaucracy and too much relying on the way that we do things, the age-old way of doing things, instead of thinking out of the box, letting the private sector show us how we can do this. But if we would measure that in a different way, then we could have better results. But they chose to continue to fail in meeting their goal, and that's what I just do not understand that as a business person.
But they didn't want to measure this other private sector solution. They wanted to
No.
measure 2-year and 4-year colleges,
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah, because according to what they say their mission is, and I know this, I understand this. It says that their job is to manage the the universities and the K through 12 schools, and their mission isn't these private sector training programs. But still, there's got to be a way that you could somehow. In fact, what I said to them is, just go to this association has the results published on their website. All you have to do is just bring that in to your data. It may not be your mission to manage these other schools, but just bring the data in
But they're
to what
part
you're
they're
measuring.
part of the outcome that they're seeking, supposedly.
Yes.
If
Yeah,
if
yeah.
if we take them at their word that that's what they're seeking, but maybe it's just to get more kids into the system that is mostly managed by the government.
Well, unfortunately, that may be more what it's all about, funneling people more into those government
It's revenue.
schools. Mhm.
It's revenue. I wanted to ask also about some topical questions that have come up this legislative session on education, namely the expansion of the education system to include full day kindergarten in every school district. Or they don't say it that way. They say, well, it could be used for after school programs, or it could be used for pre before the school opens, or summer school programs. But really what they're saying, at least right now, is they want full day kindergarten funded in every school district in the state, I
Mhm.
think. What's your position on that?
It's not constitutional. Our Constitution only requires the state to be responsible for a child at a certain age. And so again, I think we always should go back to our Constitution to guide our decisions and our actions. That if it's not what our Constitution requires of us, then why are we doing it? And whether it's the right thing to do or not, just ask the question, why are we doing that? And maybe it's a nicety, maybe they have proof that it's good for the kids. I went to preschool but my parents paid for it because it was outside of the public school system. And it's just so, I'm not really opposed to the idea of early childhood education, but it's whether we're going to force the taxpayer to foot the bill for it and compel it,
So
because that's the next step, is you're compelling these kids to go.
does that belief then apply to the existing system with the half-day kindergartens? We shouldn't be doing those either?
Yeah, I'd say so.
I agree.
It's not a requirement. It might be a nicety. I do believe in local support, that if the property tax owners are willing to tax themselves more and pay for that program, then that's their choice. But that's the other thing people need to remember when they see those property tax bills, that
That's
are
why.
you showing up at your school? Are you showing up, and are you voting for all these things? Are you showing up at the city council meetings when they present their budgets, showing up at the county when they present their budgets? State doesn't, this is all local government. And it's not the role of the state government to determine those budgets. Although I think we should put some restrictions on how much they can grow.
You could
every
do
year.
that. You don't have on your list on education, but I need to ask. With regard to the teachers' unions, some of those collective bargaining entities, um, there's a requirement that that school boards negotiate with the teachers' unions. Should public collective bargaining be occurring in the state?
Well, the law has been there's been effort to change that law when I served in the House, and it's still continuing to just change that one word from shall to may, saying that the school districts, instead of forcing them to work with the union, they may work with the union. And so that's been what's your question? I think it's been an age-old battle.
Yeah.
I need to make sure I answer your questions.
If you were governor, I mean, I get that you support the shall to may concept, not compelling, but there are some states that don't have public collective bargaining at all, and there have been efforts in states, Wisconsin being the most recent, I think, that everyone remembers, from about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, to eliminate public collective bargaining. Is that something that Governor McGeachin would be looking at?
Well, I did, when I was a state representative, I did cast a vote to change that it was no longer an automatic payroll deduction, that it had to have been they had to choose to have it be taken out of their paycheck for
I
paying the
remember that bill. That was
dues.
about 20
Yeah,
years ago.
yeah.
Mhm. So that's one.
It
So do you go the rest of the route and say no public collective bargaining in Idaho, or the teachers union doesn't just automatically get bargaining privileges because they're the teachers union? Where
Well,
do you go with that?
yeah, I would support the change of that from shall to may.
But not eliminating public collective bargaining.
Well, I don't view it as being public bargaining, because they could choose to organize, but it's just like other labor organizations in the state, where we are an at will state of employment, that people are not compelled to be part of this if they don't want to
They are
be.
not compelled, but the unions still have bargaining rights spelled out in law. So yes, they may not have to be a member, but the union must negotiate. Well, the fire and teachers unions have compelled public collective bargaining. The police unions in some cities do as well, but that's optional, I guess, more or
Mm.
less. But some states have completely done away with public collective bargaining, or have not permitted it at all to begin with.
Well, again, I'm not, if workers choose to organize and advocate, then that's their business, and if they're willing to pay for it. But the taxpayer, people should not be forced into that. And I support the idea of giving school districts the option to negotiate with them rather than forcing them. to negotiate with them.
Fair enough. Okay. What else? What other things do you want to cover before we wrap it up? Because we can be going all night, and we could. I don't care.
Well,
I love policy.
Kind of another visionary idea on number 7 bullet point under military and defense. Again, because of our National Guard men and women have been forced to take the mRNA shot. If we were to establish our own state guard, similar to what Florida Governor DeSantis recently did, then we would be more in control of our men and women. What's important there is that Congress continues to send our men and women to these forever wars, and Congress isn't doing their job. Their job is to declare a war, and then they send our men and women out. That hasn't been what's happened in decades. So I support a return to our constitutional basis where Congress, if they're going to call our men and women out, they must do their job, declare a war, so we could have more say over that. If we had our own state guard, if the president ever ordered them to go off, then we could say, well, they're part of the state guard, so you're not going to have our men and women. They're going to stay in Idaho. They're going to help us defend our borders and help us out with natural disasters. And yeah, so I think that's just, and the framework is already there in our statute. And another thing about Idaho that maybe people don't know is Idaho is getting to be a state where lots of retired law enforcement and lots of veterans are coming to our state. And this would provide an opportunity for them to get involved and help solve some of the problems that we have.
It's an interesting one. Okay. One more. Can we do one more? Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah.
What should the state policies be relative to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies?
Well, I appreciate you coming to the Capitol Clarity that day to discuss the bill that was going through, and it was helpful for me to understand that that bill it was working through really didn't do much. But
it potentially sets up a framework, but we don't know because it just defines what a digital asset is, which, okay, well, what's the usefulness of that? But we'll see.
I think Idaho, we could become a Bitcoin haven here in Idaho if we did things right. But you can't, that whole purpose of having that Bitcoin presentation or cryptocurrency at Capitol Clarity that day was to just really understand what is this and how does it work. The worst thing is to get a bunch of politicians try to regulate something that they don't really understand. So I think that's the first step in becoming better educated and freeing. I do think there are a lot of opportunities. The last thing I think is giving the government is already tanking the value of our dollar. So why would we feel that there would be any faith if we allowed the government to regulate cryptocurrency, that they wouldn't do the same to tank that form of currency?
Government has a habit of really screwing up a lot of things.
Yes.
Should Bitcoin be on the state's balance sheet?
No.
No.
I mean, you have to start with defining, I guess. Okay, I don't know. I'll say that. Maybe I don't know.
Oh,
I need to learn more.
something we need to talk more about.
Yeah, let's talk more about it.
We'll talk more about
Because
that.
you got to define it. How do you define it? And yeah, it can't be listed as an asset until there's more definition on it.
Well, I mean, you can't even, the state treasurer has no ability to purchase it if she wanted to because it's not in code. And so even if she felt that it was an asset that I would apply the same question to gold and silver. Should gold and silver be on the state's balance sheet? Should the state hold physical gold and silver?
Yes.
You have no hesitation on that.
Yeah, absolutely. We should hold gold and silver.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, it's a real asset.
We'll talk about the value of Bitcoin being digital gold.
Okay.
All right. Anything else you want to talk?
But there again, you gotta define it, and you got those politicians getting involved in that, and that just makes me a little nervous. But.
Yeah, I certainly could understand that. And there are probably ways you could define it without tripping up terribly. Bitcoin, okay, a decentralized cryptocurrency with a maximum supply, not owned or controlled by any company, person, or foundation.
Well, Jimmy and I were talking about this whole meta facility that's going up outside of Kuna. What's that all about? Are they going to be are they trying to create their own currency
At
out
one
there?
time, Facebook was trying to do that. I don't know if they're still interested in doing that or no. It's been a number of years since they announced that they were going to create a cryptocurrency, and there was a great deal of fanfare, and there was a ton of negative reaction to it, and it just quietly disappeared. So I don't know if that's what they're doing or not. I thought they were doing some kind of data storage out that way.
That's probably part of the problem is they applied for they made this application with the state tax commission and as far as my understanding, the local government under a a name, the Peregrine Project. People didn't even know who really the
Yeah.
project was for, and so
That's just crazy.
it is
And
crazy.
that's the nature of what government and businesses are doing to operate these days. Is if you go to the Commerce Department's website, and you've probably seen that whole list of Project Bronco and Project Vista, and I don't even know all the different names, but they're all these secret projects that they have, and they're going to give them some kind of tax benefit
Mhm.
by their desire to move here. And if you're a big business, you get that, but if you're a little business, you get the
You get the shaft.
yeah, you get
And that's why when President Trump ran for president the first time around, he talked about that's what was happening in Washington, D.C., and we have that happening right here in Idaho too.
you were one of
Mhm.
the OG Trump supporters in the state,
Mhm.
if I remember
Yeah,
correctly,
yeah,
even before the primary,
yeah. I was
when there were
part of
still
the
a lot of Republicans in the race,
Trump
including
Idaho team. Yep.
including Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. They were on the ballot, and Marco's not a good one, but forget I mentioned Marco. But they were still on. I just remember that because the first time that I saw you advocating for Trump was at that Lincoln Day event in Idaho
Yep.
Falls, and there was a straw poll that was done that night, and you got up and spoke for Trump. Frank Vandersloot got up and spoke on behalf of Mark Rubio. I
Mhm.
can't remember who spoke on behalf of Ted Cruz,
Mhm.
but the straw poll was conducted, and did Cruz win, or
He
did
did.
Cruz
Won.
won, and
Yep.
then Trump, and then Rubio came in
Mhm.
last, if I remember right. And he was actually there in person too, wasn't he?
I don't. I
Wasn't he? I don't
can't.
remember
I
now.
don't.
Been too
It was
long ago.
actually Cruz's father that was
Oh,
there in
that's right. You're
person.
right. It was his dad that
Yeah.
was there, the
I
pastor.
know that was hard because even some of my good conservative friends back home, and they were all for Cruz, and I wasn't necessarily against Cruz, but
What did you
I like
see?
Trump. I
What did
liked
you
his
see that early on that everyone else
his
was?
spunk, his vision, his not being afraid to just speak his mind, and and the vision of just I mean he spoke to so many Americans that the forgotten man about the system that of corruption that is prevalent in our nation and our politics, and that meant a lot to me. It's what encouraged me to get back involved in this process in the executive branch of government and run for lieutenant governor.
Anything else you want to talk about tonight before we wrap it
Boy,
up?
well,
There's
I
a
think
lot. We could
we
go all night.
covered a lot,
We did.
and I don't know. Hopefully, the Senate will be wrapping up their business this week, and the House, I think they're going to be done Friday.
Thankfully,
Yes, and I'll be
I
really anxious
I
to go
think it was
home.
one of the worst legislative sessions I've ever been involved in. This is my 28th session.
Last year wasn't bad.
Yeah, well, yes, it was, but we still managed to get some things accomplished, believe it or not, in previous legislative sessions. This one was just it was, to put it politely, a shit show.
Just spending a lot of money and
Spending a
lot of
lot
money.
of money,
Mhm.
way too much money,
And not
uh,
making changes.
not not addressing a lot of the
Mm.
issues that people have expressed concern about,
Yeah.
blocking a lot of bills people have been interested in and wanting to see discussed
Yeah.
even.
And that's I mean, not to end on a negative note, but we are in my campaign, we're making phone calls and we're going to doors and talking to people. And there is a sense of hopelessness and frustration that's growing out there that we're hearing because, the issue of the cost of living is just so heavy on the minds of Idahoans today, where the food is so expensive. Gas, trying to put gas in your car is so high, and it's just a real, people are, and they're seeing things that are happening in the other parts of the world, and people are concerned, and it just seems like to them the media doesn't want to talk about these things, and these issues aren't being addressed by the leaders in our state and our country.
And you believe that you offer something a little different, I guess. Is that
Well, I mean, just on gas. I mean, why there's a bill in Ways and Means in the House that would eliminate or remove the gas, the
not
sales tax on
and
gas, which, what is it? You tell me,
well
Wayne, what is it?
the gas
16
tax
cents a gallon?
now, I think I'm trying to remember, is it 32 cents?
Okay,
I want to
32,
think it's 32. I don't
32
remember.
cents a
It was
gallon. If they would just say, okay, we're going to remove gas tax for a year or 2 years. Think of the difference that would make in your gas tank if they would do that.
but you can't even have a debate on that,
Can't even have a debate on it because they won't
which is interesting.
allow the bill out of Ways and Means Committee. So there's a lot of bills that have been presented to try to help address these concerns for the people of Idaho. But unfortunately, the elites in the legislature and in leadership that we have today don't want to have that discussion. And that's why it's time for a change in Idaho, time for new leadership, and start having an agenda that works more for the people of Idaho and not the special interests and the crony corruption.
Well, there's a lot of differences between the candidates for governor, and so I appreciate you coming on so people can hear what those are. I'm anxious to hear from the other candidates as well, and see what they have to say and what they offer. I'd love to hear from the governor to explain some of the criticisms that you've leveled at him, because I think it's worthy of a discussion. And by the way, we're also trying to, I'll just throw this out there, we're working on trying to get a roundtable where we just have a nice discussion, not a debate, but just a discussion where we sit around and we talk about some of this stuff, and not level charges or accusations, but just paint the visions for what you want to do versus what Governor Little or any of the other candidates are interested in doing. So
I welcome that, and I hope you can be successful in
I do
getting
too.
all candidates to the table. I watched a debate that happened up in North Idaho at a church, and they did a really good job. They started out the debate in prayer, so that I think it really helped to temper so that people could just talk about policy and not just attack
What was that, the Secretary of State's
personalities.
race?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I heard that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see the same thing happen, whether we put it on here as part of this setting or if somebody else does it, but not the leftist news media. I'm not
right.
interested to see a debate that's conducted by
By Brian
KTVB,
Holmes,
right? Brian Holmes,
KTVB,
right? Or Melissa
Idaho
Deb
Public
on Public Television.
Television.
Not interested in that. So
It needs to be
hopefully,
fair and balanced.
hopefully we'll get a really good discussion about who best carries the banner of the Republican Party or conservative thought in the state.
Yeah.
So
we could have honest debate and discussion and not just attack people's character.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. Thank you again for being on. And yet again, I don't remember who's coming on Thursday. Hey, Allie, do you know? I don't know. Who is? Oh, Barbie Hart's going to be here on Thursday. One of your homies from Idaho Falls, who's been working a lot on some really good legislation. So looking forward to seeing her. Okay.
Well, it's been fun.
It's been fun. Thank you so much for being on the program, and we'll talk to you again next time.
Okay.
Thanks for being here. Let me just make sure.